Good afternoon. Good afternoon to those of you here in London and in the UK. Good morning, good evening to everybody else online, wherever you are. I just had an update. We've had over 1,600 people sign up to this event from some 41 countries. I think that's amazing. My name is Nick Lyne. I am the Chief Underwriting Officer at Markel International, where I'm also the executive sponsor for diversity and inclusion, and I'm not ashamed to say that. More importantly, I am the new chair of the Inclusion at Lloyd's Committee, which is a group working alongside Lloyd's and its syndicates and brokers to attract and retain the very best talent we can into this brilliant but somewhat under-publicised market to help secure its long-term future. Our focus is on extending the talent pipeline beyond traditional sources at early, mid and senior career levels, and on creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and so is able to contribute at their maximum potential. And I expect that some of today's session might touch on that topic. My job today is to introduce our keynote speaker. And to help me do that, I turned to the internet and to social media. And the more I looked, the more I realized that she needs no introduction at all, at least to most people. In fact, I quickly realized that the only person really benefiting from my research was myself. She is a prolific podcaster, a newspaper journalist, a TED talker, a best-selling author, a radio host, and a social media influencer. And what she hasn't done or doesn't know, hasn't written about, or hasn't shared with her followers on a huge range of topics, frankly, isn't worth worrying about. She has covered topics such as pregnancy and miscarriage, childbirth and postnatal depression, parenting and working, including the costs of being late for nursery pickup, which many of us have suffered, parenting and marriage, parenting and divorce, and many other more light-hearted topics that had me giggling on the train on my way into work last week whilst doing my research. She has been an ardent promoter of flexible working through her Flexibile campaign, lobbying the government with tremendous success, resulting in last year's passing of the Flexible Working Bill here in the UK. She was also recently named as the number 10 in the independent newspaper's list of top 50 women, all whilst bringing up 2 children and more recently, very recently, a third, all of which I assume has involved some element of flexible working. I believe, based on my research, it's 10 years ago that she quit her job after her employer denied a very simple and reasonable flexible working request. And she became what was at the time one of 54,000 mothers a year for whom biology becomes a limitation on career progression. And I wonder whether that statistic has something to do with the fact that if you go upstairs from here into the underwriting room, you will see potentially, possibly, a greater proportion of male underwriters than you probably should. And whilst it's a lot better, so much better than when I first walked in there 28 years ago for the first time, it's certainly true that if you ask those underwriters for the name of their CUO, they will be more Johns and Richards than women. Before you quote me on that or fact check, I haven't actually checked that exactly. You know what I'm referring to and you get the point I'm making. So having quit her job and determined to do something about the problem, our guest today set up a website called Mother Pukka. My wife told me to say that very carefully. It was a website for people who happen to be parents, and the rest, as I've explained already, is history. She is a truly remarkable person, and I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to Anna Whitehouse.
Thanks, Nick. And thank you to everyone coming today. I wanted to start with the strapline where it said glass ceilings that we're always trying to aspire to smash through with a sledgehammer. And I'd like to talk about the maternal wall that you have to crash through to get to even, continuing with your job. I stand here right now on 2 hours sleep. I've got breast pads in, my baby's out the back and she's probably going to have to come on. I'm going to have to breastfeed in a moment. I'm really exhausted, and this is my first talk back for International Women's Day. And I'm going to start by saying I wasn't on maternity leave. I think leave does such a disservice to the separation anxiety of coming back, the exhaustion levels, the crying, the leaking breasts, the biology of what it is to raise the next generation, not just your child. It's not leave, it's service. I left, but I was in service 24/7 with a very demanding boss who is not giving me as much flexible working as I'd hoped. And I think that words matter, I actually was a 21-year-old girl. I had a law degree. I went to the bar. I did a mini pupillage just down the road at Devereux Chambers. And I was stood there as a 21-year-old girl, and I looked around a room like this, and I could not see any women beyond the age of having children. I could not see myself in the future, and I knew that I wanted to have a baby at some point. And so what I did in that moment is, instead of continuing and smashing those glass ceilings, I saw the maternal wall and I sidestepped, and I became a journalist because I wanted to talk about that very blockade for a young girl like me, a young woman like me, young women looking at your industry right now and going, well, why on earth aren't there any women underwriting at the moment? I can't see what I can't become. And I think, like many women, we also don't change things for ourselves. Good God, I wish I'd backed myself back there and really, really fought for change for me. No, change came when my first daughter was born, and I thought, do you know what? I can't raise her to work hard in her ABCs, to perhaps do her GCSEs, to perhaps go and do her A-levels. You remember that moment where you first get a phone and a computer and you just feel like, Lord Sugar. I can't raise her for all of that, to be anything, do anything you want, to have somebody say no and close the door on her at a point where it just comes down to the fact she has ovaries. That's it. The working world is not set up for women. You think of it from young girls with periods doing GCSEs to mothers like me, and unfortunately the stat as of this week has gone up from not 54,000 women are pushed out on maternity leave every single year, 74,000 women. It's gone up. When we think, oh, we've done a lot for women, it's all good, we've got International Women's Day, so tick, tick, tick. What's happening for the other 365 days of the year? That's why I'm here, is to sort of join those gaps together. I want to just go back a little bit to the point where I say left my job, made a decision. And I think, again, coming back to language is important. I took control. I was running late for nursery pickup, and I don't know any parents here that I used to call it running the gauntlet, where it would be like, right, 4:59 p.m., let's leave. We've got to get there for 6 p.m. I cannot have a leaf on the line. I cannot have any tubes go down. My stress levels are up to here, but I've got to get there. And I was the mother that was there always 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes late for pickup. I was charged £1 a minute after 6 and was sort of sat on one of those tiny primary coloured chairs meant for an infant and chastised. And on top of that, my Bambi-eyed little girl with a Paw Patrol backpack on was looking at me as if to say, why are you late? And I left that moment and I thought, I need to get some flexibility here. I can't do this. And it's interesting how I felt it was on my shoulders too, and I think I'll come to that later in this discussion. I thought, I need flexible working. So I was working at the time for the L'Oreal group, and I didn't leave because I wasn't worth it. It was categorically worth every word that I wrote for their copywriting team. And I have a great relationship with them still. I didn't leave because I had a terrible boss. I didn't leave because of anything other than inflexibility. And I asked to come in 15 minutes earlier, and I asked to leave 15 minutes earlier. So I'm not asking for more. I'm actually doing the same, just flexibly. And my request was denied, as many requests prior to mine were denied, because it will open the floodgates to others seeking flexible working. And you know what, in that moment, I was like, people are drowning behind these floodgates. People with caring responsibilities, people with disabilities, people with anxiety, people are drowning, so we need to smash them open. And this is not a case of a sort of little nice to have, a little bonus ball, a ping pong table in reception, or a bit of flexible working. No, this is a fundamental change to the fabric of our working world. A working world that was born in the Industrial Revolution when men went out and earned the bacon, women cooked it. No, that needs to change, not just for us, but for those coming through. And I remember around this time, one of the catalysts for trying to change legislation, and we'll come on to cultural change later, was a quote from Douglas Copeland, the author. And he said, I truly believe we're going to look back on the 9 to 5 like we did child slavery in the 18th century. It's barbaric. And I'm going to say that word again, barbaric, because when you look at it, and the TED talk I did with my now ex-husband, if I'd had flexible working, who knows how it would have worked out. But when we did our TED talk, it was centered on, again, the optics. So if you look at a sort of office space, and you look at like a battery hen farm, there's compartments that people and hens and chickens are put into. They're essentially contained in this space. Now, free-range chickens laid bigger eggs, they lived longer, they were healthier, happier, but the battery farm hens died sooner, their eggs were less large and wonderful to sell, and ultimately, the company or the battery farm was being done out. So I never came to the table fighting for the utterly exhausted, broken, desperately sad, disconnected from my family life person that I was. I came to the table because I was like, wait a second, these businesses are losing out on talent, cold, hard cash. They are losing out. We found in our Flexonomics report that I did with Sir Robert McAlpine, we did that in 2019, and we found that if every single company in the UK adopted some form of not flexible working, agile working, flexibility of mind, there would be a £55 billion boost to the UK economy. So this is not me with my exhausted, eye-twitching, leaking body coming here saying, do it for the mummies. It's do it for everyone. Do it for the construction workers. So Robert McAlpine came on board with Flex Appeal because they said, we have seen since 2013 to 2018, 1,700 men have died by suicide on construction sites because they have been given no flexibility to see their people, and it was becoming crisis point. So they joined with me, Mother, construction workers, and we campaigned on the streets to effect change within public sector and private sector. I was speaking to Nick earlier about the LinkedIn effect, and I think this is a powerful one, that everybody is pushing their employees back to the office now 5 days a week, 4 days a week. You see headlines everywhere. And we are going backwards. The moment, 23rd of March 2020, when companies prior to that, a week prior to that, had said to me, oh, I love what you do, darling, but it won't work in our industry, I'm afraid. Flexible working, lovely for other people, maybe the more artsy world, not for us. 2 weeks later, if you didn't zoom in and log on, you had to shut down. So it was quite interesting to see the U-turn in those that were slamming the door in my face. And I think where we need to get to with this is to see this as a people issue. This isn't a mother issue. This is for men who need to parent, want to parent. They're not babysitting their children or daddy daycare. Can we be done with that? I heard from a dad a couple of weeks ago, and he said, my flexible working request was denied. I wanted to see my daughter, pick her up from nursery on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and it was denied by a Magic Circle law firm who said, essentially, well, can't your missus do that? And he was like, well, my missus is a brain surgeon, so you pick a lane. And it was that, I was going to say unconscious bias, but it's conscious. And I think we are now in a position where we need to raise our voices. We're going to be coming on to that on the panel discussion. We need to unite, raise our voices, not feel that any one person in this room needs to wait for legislation. The flexible working bill landed on the 6th of April last year. But do you know what? Change is actually here. It's in this room. It's men stepping up and not feeling emasculated for asking to look after their children. It's women feeling like they're not having to do all the work and smashing through the glass ceilings and bulldozing the maternal wall. It's actually a woman going off on maternity leave and not having her boss whisper behind the scenes to her maternity cover, she's probably not coming back. Let's lead with, she's coming back. How do we support her in doing that? So I think I want to kind of end with a bit of a rallying cry in that I have 4 daughters now, 1 stepdaughter, a newborn, 2 daughters from my previous marriage. And I want to genuinely be able to look them in the eye and go, I did everything I could to change the lay of the land for you to not sit there being written out the minute that you hear that you have a pregnancy test that's positive, the minute that you go into the menopause, that your experience matters and that you're simply in a system that does not work for women. So what are we all doing together as a team, whether that's buddying up with somebody who's coming back from maternity leave instead of elbowing her out, whether that's actually being transparent. I think it was Robert Reitbrick, who was the CEO of PepsiCo in New Zealand, and he had a very simple, cost-effective way of navigating flexibility in leaving loudly. Say I'm off to see my son play basketball. I mean, maybe not more personal gynecological appointments. Obviously, tailor it to the team. But I think humanizing business, instead of just recruiting with IQ, we need EQ right in the middle of it. Accenture now recruits through a 50% EQ and IQ level. So they are seeing humans in business. They're using words like a humane way of working, because we aren't battery hens. We don't work being contained. If you empower your workforce, and I'm going to say this, there is no one more productive than a woman on maternity leave who is navigating screaming child with Paw Patrol demands. Well, it's Bluey now, and I'm going back into it again. I mean, Mummy Pig's now on her 3rd baby as well, I think we've seen. So God help her, and I'd love to know what Daddy Pig's doing to pick up the invisible labour, because that has not been on the table. But I think, yes, it's time to recognise that you might be sitting in this room wondering, but what can I do? I am exhausted, I've got children, I need to keep my job. If I raise my voice, will it mean I don't get a promotion? If I do this? And what we're going to be talking about today is how all our voices together, supporting the groundswell of women coming up, not seeing, like I did when I was younger, somebody leaving to go and pick up their daughter from daycare, not thinking, God, they're slackers. You know, the word part-time is synonymous with slacking. And no, part-time is just fewer days and less pay. And no, you're not having a day off on the Friday. I don't know anyone here who's ever had these things said to them. Either, these are very triggering for me, either enjoy your day off, you're like, no, I'm not being paid for that day. Or how was your break on maternity leave? No, no, again, we're not going. Or I think the worst I had was from my dad. I hope you're enjoying being a lady of leisure. And I'm going to end on that note because my dad was my biggest critic, okay? He worked for Slaughter and May. He was a partner at a law firm. It was a very male-dominated environment. And he came round about 3 or 4 years ago and he said, I actually think sometimes, you're right, Anna, that was the first thing I needed to hear. But he said sometimes I think the wording puts people off, like flexible working feels like something we have to do. Another thing on the list of things managers have to navigate. He said, why don't we say agile working? He also said job shares. It feels again like a bit of a weight of labour there in trying to find two people to do the job. Why don't we say job pairing, like you're pairing two brilliant people together? So if I can crack my dad, and if I can have him standing there going, I get it, it needs to change. And again, this is not for women, it's not just for my daughters, it's for everyone. There's predominantly women in this room, but we need more men in this room. We do. We can't be having these conversations in an echo chamber of agreement. So I hope you take this forward to your own homes, challenge your own partners, like Mummy Pig will be doing right now with Daddy Pig, I'm sure, and see what we can do as a collective to change the narrative and the working world for our children. So let's talk about flex indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's so inspiring to hear from somebody who's quite clearly a trailblazer and someone I know I've followed for a long time on LinkedIn. So weird to call you Anna rather than Mother Pukka, I must say. I'd love to invite the panel up for the conversation, which we're going to continue. And there's going to be a QR code as well coming up on the screen for questions. That is how we're going to take the Q&A session at the end of this conversation. So if I can get you just to engage in that, I'm monitoring it. We will be going through questions as we go through this afternoon. The session. So, welcome to the panel. Do you want me to? Is that okay? Yeah. Easier.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. And we're going to start with you, Lisa. That's okay. So our theme today is Elevate Her. Can you tell us how this resonates with you?
So I think people can experience an element of elevation in both personal and professional life, and being able to see where you want to push on to and be in a higher position both in your career but also at home. This may be, as Anna talked about earlier, about breaking the barriers when you want to have children. This can also be when you're maybe have someone to care for. So really, having these barriers that we need to break, we need to think about, are they actually there or are they invisible, and things that we think about in our minds. And going through having a child, or I have two children myself, when I fell pregnant with my first son, I actually thought my career could potentially be over. And, one of the first things, instead of joy to me, was what am I going to do about work, and how am I going to be able to continue my job? And that it shouldn't be like that, and you should be able to think that there isn't something above you and you can push on to be who you want to be. And actually I came back to work at a young age after my time off and I continued my career and had another baby in between, and now I lead an international accident and health business, which at the time when I was 23 years old and found out I was pregnant, I never thought I'd be able to do. So.
And I think a lot of what Anna was saying, your phrases, I know a lot of them resonated with me. A question I think I've heard far too many times from women in the market is, when is a good time for me to have my baby? And to your point around this kind of conversation, I think these are things we hear in our heads a lot, and conversations we have in our heads a lot, but actually sharing them out loud and realising actually there are people that can talk and support and actually make us feel relatable for these issues that are going through can really help in there too. Is there anything you'd add to that, Anna, for these topics that come through?
Sorry, I didn't know you were going to come to me.
No, I didn't. I was surprised. So people trying to think about how to plan sort of their life.
Yeah, well, I think this is where we need everyone to step up, because it frustrates me so much, even the structure of leave, for example, paternity leave, 2 weeks, then you've got a year that we're out of our careers, essentially. And there is no right time. I feel devastated. It really breaks my heart on a really human, personal level. The women that wait, and actually go, well, I might get this promotion at this point, and I'm going to be really a trigger warning here around miscarriage. I mean, I miscarried at my desk and didn't tell anyone because I feared it might mean that my boss knew that I was trying, and then it might scupper a promotion landing. You think of that, just contain that. You know, we are constantly, from the moment that we have our first period, thinking about when is the right time to have children, and it's not always your choice. So the devastation of them realizing after that it's not, you know, it's not, we can't be allowing businesses to dictate, you know, our family life, our future, and the impact on that. So I think we need, like I said earlier, around men requesting flexibility as well as women. Only 1 in 10 requests goes through for men at the moment. 4 in 10 goes through for women. So that, I was going to say burden of childcare, but bulk of childcare is still on female shoulders. So instead of, you know, your partner coming back and shoulder slump going, oh, you know, it's not really the done thing, no one else does it, you know, be the one that does it, and encourage, have those arguments within your home, categorically have them before you have a baby, because it's a slippery downward slope from there, is all I'm going to say. So I think we each, coming back to the unity in this room, we each need to raise our voices in our own homes. I think that's where it starts.
Thank you. And Kira, we've been talking in the sort of pre-calls around the phrase imposter syndrome, which a lot of us, no doubt, will hear quite a lot over International Women's Week. And it's not something you necessarily identify with the sort of common definition. Do you want to tell us about your perspective on that and how it shows up for you?
Yeah, of course. And before I just start, I just want to say it's an absolute honour being here today. So thank you to Jen for organising this and having me with the amazing panel and the amazing Mother Pukka. Thank you. So... Imposter syndrome. So I actually Googled it this morning. When did that word start? 1978. So 2 psychologists, 2 women, wrote about something called the imposter phenomenon in high achieving women. That's how long ago. But we hear about this word, these 2 words, which I'm not a fan of, all the time. Now, I want to challenge that idea. What actually is imposter syndrome? Look, I'm sitting here in my bright pink dress, adorned with Indian jewellery. To say I suffer from imposter syndrome, I feel is a little bit of an oxymoron. But I will tell you, last year I was sat over there with the wonderful Yasmin, and we were listening to the panel event, and Lisa was here in a brilliant, vibrant lilac jacket, and I'll never forget her. And then I followed her around. It was Dr. Sam Collins was talking about inclusion. And I remember sitting there and I turned to Yasmin and I said, oh my goodness, this panel is phenomenal. I wish I could do something like that, but I don't know if I can. Fast forward a year, here I am. Not because I didn't think I belonged, never. It was because I was nervous, I was scared. And I think that's when growth happens. So let's stop thinking about those 2 words. Let's reframe it. Don't shrink back. If you're worried, step forward. That's exactly where you're meant to be. I carry a clipboard because I've got bullet notes on here. Not because I'm thinking, oh my God, I've got nothing interesting to say. Well, you might think differently. But because I get tongue-tied, I get nervous. So I have it as a prompt. And it's clearly imposter syndrome. We have enough barriers. Anna talked about the barriers earlier. Why are we slapping more on? Barrier after barrier after barrier. We have to stop doing that. Not just women, men, all of us, collectively. So what I want you to start doing is reframing your mind right now. Not when you leave here. Think of it differently. Our brain has 2 parts. One that says we don't belong, one that says we do. The fact that we're here, doesn't that prove something? Doesn't that tell us we're exactly where we should be? Because we are. Now, quickly touching on that, a personal incident for me recently. On New Year's Day, my mum had a seizure and a fall. She lost all her mobility in her hands and legs. She could not walk. She couldn't even ring anybody. She ended up in hospital. It was so traumatic for everybody. I was going to work. I was going to visit her every day, watching her be fed. I had to feed her. Now, at the time, I have various apps on my phone because I support my mum. And I could see on my phone that the heating app, that her house was 9 degrees. We're in the middle of winter. Why is it 9 degrees? I left work, went to the hospital, went to her house. The whole front garden's dug up. I go in the house. It is freezing. The next day, I have a call with Bex, JC and Lily from Gin. Would you like to be on the panel? I'm sitting there in a fur coat and hat. They're thinking, God, she's stylish. I'm like, actually, let me tell you a story. So there was no hot water, there was no gas, there was no heating. You ring up utilities, press 1, press 2, press 5, they've cut you off. You get my feeling, yeah? This happens a lot. Really frustrating. Now, I was overwhelmed. I was exhausted. Going back to what Anna says, you're up so early, you have a few hours sleep. I was exhausted as well for different reasons. And not for 1 minute did I think I can't cope. I was tired, I was overwhelmed, but I did it because we do. That is what we do. But I also thought, damn, why am I not a CEO of a company? Because I literally now have British Gas on speed dial. I have everybody's phone numbers, and I had them jet washing the front garden because there was no way I was going to give up on this. My mum was going to come home and I was going to sort that house out. So every time you have that moment of doubt, you think about that, growth is happening. You are where you're supposed to be. Don't shrink back, step forward.
Thank you, Kira. Michelle, we're hearing about support and how we can help each other, and I've just done a little room count. I think we have now eight men in the room. So big shout out for them. Thank you so much for coming. So how important is allyship and how can that support us?
Allyship is the cornerstone of belonging and inclusion. It's super important, and it may sound cliched, but everyone can be an ally. And I wrote down the definition of what an ally actually is. So it's a person or organisation that actively supports the rights of a minority or marginalised group without being a member of it. And the last part is really important here, about without being a member of it, because an ally is a selfless act. It's not about the ally. It's about what they can do to support to support others. And so it's really important as leaders when we're in meetings, if we're on a project and we know that Claire is going to be fantastic at that project, but she's not in that space at the moment, then we should champion Claire in that meeting and say, actually, that's a person we need to work with. But also on the positive and negative side, when you see something, say something and be empowered by your leaders that you're in an environment where you can actually do that and support where it's needed. Understand your communities, understand what they need and how they can be supported. So allyship is really important for inclusion and belonging to work.
Can I just add something quickly to that? Just a little case study on how I got my job at Heart Radio. I had a 4-month-old baby and I was dealing with separation anxiety, postnatal depression. And I had my 3rd demo there, and the other 2 hadn't gone very well. And the producer guy called Martin Bruce, he said to me, Anna, this is your last chance. Unfortunately, the powers that be, if this doesn't work out, you're kind of out. And I broke down this pivotal moment in my career, and I couldn't get there. I couldn't speak. I couldn't do it. And he stopped everything. He said, give me a sec. He turned the lights off, and he said, you're on Shit FM. You're just talking to your best mate. And he said, tell me this story about Rihanna. And I did it. And that got me the job. And it was because an ally in that moment didn't look at me and see a woman crying. He looked at a woman carrying a lot. And I wouldn't have got that job. I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for that level of allyship, not just turning up to panels, that level of EQ, emotional intelligence.
And Anna, the level of change that you've brought about is very inspiring. Yeah. So there's people here today thinking, what can I do within my role, within my organisation or within the market? What advice would you give them?
So I'm going to pick up something that you said earlier, actually, was my boss at Global, she did not go for the role because she looked down the list of things that you needed to do the role of managing editor of Global. And she went, I can't do that. And it was actually, again, a male colleague who went, you categorically can, because I promise you every other man that has come in to do that role has only 2 things on the list and they're going in for it hell for leather. So go for it. And she got the job and she did brilliantly. And what she did from that point onwards was, in terms of going, I'm sure there's many other women in my position who have imposter syndrome, who are minimizing themselves before even getting into the room and maximizing their potential. So she set up, a network, not a women's network. I think that's important, a human network where these kind of talks can thrive. But she also empowered younger members of the organisation to create their own groups. This isn't just about parents, it's about people. It's about Gen Zers who now don't want to come into work but want to work in a different way. It's about the whole outlook. And I think the best example I can give you was HSBC had a finance assistant, young girl, who got in touch with me and said, what can I do to change things for me? I can see it's not working for me. Like when I went to the bar and I could see optically it wasn't going to work for me. She said, what can I do? And I said, do you know what would be great is go to HR and say, look, we've got a bit of a gender pay gap here. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has said that flexible working is the primary way to close the gender pay gap, facts, figures. Why don't we launch an internal podcast around all these issues, every issue that every one of us sat here is talking about, every issue, human issue that you felt. I interview somebody externally, and all managers, as part of the organisation process, have to listen to this episode. So she went to HR with a positive change. I'm not saying that we all need to launch podcasts and do extra work. I'm exhausted, and I'm sure you all are too. But it's an example of somebody who might have been seen as not having a voice. And I was brought in to be one of the interviews. And from that point onwards, flexible working requests started to get acknowledged, because it wasn't just legislative change that we need to wait for, it's cultural change. You are the culture. So don't underestimate your voice and don't feel an imposter in your own organisation, because you're here for a reason.
Great, and that's so great ways we can look to impact change across the board for others. For people who are kind of going through their career themselves, Lisa, you spoke about your career journey. What might you say for somebody who feels a bit stuck where they are at the moment?
I think you need to think about what you enjoy, because we spend a lot of our lives at work, and if typically things you enjoy tend to be your strengths. So think about what are your strengths and what do you actually enjoy doing, and is there a part of what you're doing now that you do enjoy that you think you could apply in a different way. And think about setting some goals. I think the goals that you set should be measurable. I don't think we should say, by next year, I'm going to move from an underwriting assistant to the CEO of a company, but things that you can actually measure and say along the way, okay, I want from here, in the next 6 months, I want to be able to achieve this. This is what I enjoy. This is what I like doing. And don't be afraid to speak up, because, as Anna quite rightly says, you can still do it if you have to start work at 8:45 until 4:45 instead of 9 till 5. And things like having a voice and being able to ask for things that you think can accelerate you into what you want to be, just don't be afraid of doing that.
Yeah.
And I think building out a network of people, not just even within kind of your industry, but people that you can learn from. Since I worked at the company I work for now, and my role within the DEI Council, my network has increased tenfold. And, I think Kirat and I were just talking about this earlier today, meeting different people, talking to them about what do you enjoy, what do you like, how can you explore other avenues, other opportunities. It can really help you kind of move out of that feeling stuck. And I think it's so important that you mention having not just women's networks, but having, think about having mentors. They don't have to be official mentors. You don't have to join an official program. It can be, unofficial. And actually, some of the best mentors that I've personally had have been men. And so it doesn't always need to be, I feel a bit stuck, I think I need to, have a woman mentor there, and broaden your network.
Just jumping in on that very quickly, Lisa, your point about having a goal. I think a lot of us put so much pressure on ourselves, and we're juggling so many things, that we forget to enjoy the present, the now. It's good to look back to see how far you've come, and then think about what you're going to do in the future. But don't push too far ahead, because life goes like that. in a flash. People with children will know that. They grow up so quickly. So think about it in stages and steps. And exactly as you said, mentoring. I mean, I could see some mentees in the audience. And I think that's a fantastic thing that you mentioned there as well.
And I think it's not a gendered situation at the top. Often I hear from women who've been discriminated against by women. I think, you know, and there's an understandable and empathy sits here of a wave of women who had to give up having families to get to the top, who had to give up so much that there is also a pain point of watching another generation maybe coming through and seemingly having it easier. So this isn't a man-bashing exercise. I think it is a mindset shift that has to change. And we need, I think my favourite article I ever wrote was about Sir Dyson, who was pushing everyone back into the office. And I think my final line for The Independent was, there's going to be a point where the CEOs and the titans of business are just going to have to suck it up. And I think that's the truth, unfortunately. Change is going to happen. Talent's going to go elsewhere if you don't do that. But it's certainly not men at the top restricting talent and restricting that flow.
And we're talking about networks. One of the key networks is the Insurance Families Network, which Kirat co-chairs, and is one of the reasons her portrait hangs in the old library, very deservingly. So you've touched on your mum. Can you tell us a little about how caring has shaped your career?
Yeah, so look, I've been a carer from a young age and at various stages in my life, and it's defined me, not my career, it's defined who I am. And I'm looking at Sam over there. We talked about her son Leo a short time ago, and who you're a carer for. And I've been a carer for my only sibling, my brother, who passed away. And 2 years later, my father passed away of a broken heart. And Sam and I had this discussion a couple of years ago, and it gives us our superpower. Leo is her superpower. Living for my mum now is my superpower. And I carry my brother and father with me wherever I go. And as I just said earlier as well, I now care for my mum. I've actually moved in with her. So going back to what Anna was saying about, you know, juggling things, you know, carers can do a hell of a lot. Whether you're a carer for a child, whether a carer for an adult, we juggle things. We deal with complex situations. We navigate such difficult things and we work. We make brilliant employees, people, and we make great leaders and we make great managers, because what we do is we instill trust, we instill loyalty, and we show people that it can be done. You know, even when it's really painful for me sometimes, which it is, I think back and I think, I still have that gift of life, others don't. So caring for me has really, really shaped who I am as a person. Back to my clipboard. I use this for my mum's medication. I use this for my mum's appointments. And I also do lots of spreadsheets now, and I don't like spreadsheets at all. And I do that because I have to juggle her finances, her utility bills. So let's bring that into our professional life. You know, from the IFN, we've got the carers, the careers returners programme. And that's people that are coming back into the workplace that have had to take time out for caring responsibilities or for whatever reason. And they are then coming back into the workplace. Markel, I know, sponsor it as well. And it's a fantastic programme. So I really want people to, again, especially employers, to think about the skill sets that carers bring, because they are navigating so much. And some days it is so overwhelming. My day starts at 4 a.m. because I still want to fit in a gym session. And my day ends pretty late. And it is what it is. That's what we do. And I also think back, you know, when I grew up, when I was 16, I was asked what I wanted in life. And I said, not an arranged marriage and a flat in London. Everything else in my life will be a bonus, is how I felt. And that's how I feel. No matter what life throws at us, we just deal with it. And that goes back again to imposter syndrome. What is that? Let's reframe it.
Michelle, you mentioned earlier belonging, which I think is such a powerful word. What's the role of leadership in the inclusion and belonging?
The role of leadership is key in inclusion and belonging, because leadership, they set the tone. They set the tone for the organisation. And there are sponsors, there are champions, there are advocates. And it's important that they also empower their managers to do exactly the same. So from a personal perspective, it's always been a manager who's advocated for me in spaces that I may not be in every day, and has encouraged me to expand my career in ways that I didn't think that I would be able to do. And it's really important to have that one person who, or several people actually, who see that part of you and understand things that you are good at, even when you don't understand them yourself. As co-chair of the MCIN, we have a reverse mentoring program, which does exactly that. So it's a mutual exchange of information between leaders and colleagues within the organisation, and it helps to expand the dialogue, but also help to ensure that we're gendering an inclusive environment where people can grow. So it's really important.
And these mentoring sort of programs, reverse mentoring, is this something that everyone's sort of seeing happen more commonplace now? I think setting them up can be a little bit of an effort when they haven't been done before. So is there any learned experiences through that journey? Or
it's really important to have, obviously, people who want to really take part in the program, but actually what we've learned is that it's a really valuable experience. It's a valuable experience so that people understand each other's journeys and where everyone's coming from. And that's part of one of the challenges, to understand people's history, to understand their culture, to understand what not necessarily makes us different, but enriches us within the organisation.
And the next level of people coming through, I think it's really important for people that are doing particularly reverse mentoring, like, what is the generation coming through and what do they think and what do they feel? I think that's really important to take away from that.
And I think we could do with a leadership that's transparent. I don't really want to know in interviews, for example, just the 15% Fitness First discount. I want to know the maternity policy. Yeah. So don't leave me scrubbing around out back trying to find out basic things. I want to, even if I'm not thinking of having a child, I think it's really interesting to see how a company treats somebody going through quite a human juncture in their lives. I would love flexible working policies to be front and foremost. Legally, it should be, but culturally, are we doing that? No. So I think that leadership is about taking ownership, really, of the things that those may be feeling like they can't raise their voice for fear of losing their paycheck or fear of losing that promotion, which was me, are able to not have to sort of search for, is actually given to. That's accessibility, and I think there aren't enough people at the top. It's often, to be honest, boardrooms locked off, top of buildings, away from those actually predominantly driving change within those companies. And that gap needs to be bridged. And there's so many gaps: gender pay gap, pensions gap, pleasure gap, and it's just gaps everywhere.
Yeah. I think lots of people have probably been in the awkward moment of an interview where you're having to discuss salary, but the idea of asking what the maternity policy is comes with a whole nother level of awkwardness.
I took my engagement ring off in interviews for fear that it would indicate that I was potentially going to get married and have a baby. I mean, it's madness.
Yeah. But then there's such a quick fix, like you say, just put it on the internet, not the intranet, so people can look before they go and apply for those jobs.
And also case studies. If any managers here, anyone at the top, Deloitte have PDFs of different forms of flexible working with real people. So you can go in and say, I saw that John works in finance, he does 3 days, he does 2 days caring for his father, and it's explicit about the human and the business need. And so you're empowering people coming in, talent coming in, to think this is a place that opens its doors to humans, not just bots.
So there's a lot to do.
Lots.
There's a lot of questions. But what advice would you give, Anna, for people kind of looking at the change? And I think this market, we've been on a dramatic change from our starting point, but our starting point wasn't ideal. So we have a very long way to go. So in terms of the motivation to kind of keep chipping away and making these changes, how would you encourage people to kind of stay on that end goal focus?
I think you don't have a choice. I'd love to say that it would be a nice thing to do. I think the wording I used earlier was a nice to have, a kind of bonus board. No, because talent is just going to go elsewhere. It's that simple. So I could wax lyrically about the reasons why, but you're going to be the ones left with no talent coming through. You're going to be the ones left with a business that doesn't understand the majority of your consumer, perhaps half of your consumer, females, women. And I think it's not about how, it's about when, for me, and that probably less chat, more action.
So on the note of action,
Yeah.
And come to each of you. If you had one sort of tip or suggestion that you could share with people listening in as to an action they might be able to take that will either help them or others around them, what would you go with? Michelle?
I would go with network, expand your networks. Expand your networks so that you can have different experiences and take those experiences throughout your career with you, is what I would say.
Michelle just stole my line.
Sorry.
Thanks for that. Join the Insurance Families Network. It's a fantastic insurance community network. We're doing a coffee carers, which is open to all on Thursday. But very quickly, I just want to say, think about what success means to you. It means different things for different people. It doesn't always mean climbing higher. Sometimes it's about lifting others and creating meaningful change.
And I think, and apologies to anyone that has heard me say this before, but I strongly believe that we should just take the risk and believe in yourself that you can do it, because if you don't push yourself and push these barriers and these ceilings that are there, then you won't get to where you need to be.
Yeah, I think instead of having panels solely, think about the 365 days of the year that we're all existing within this business, and do something tangible that isn't just joining the Working Forward Pledge, for example, which is part of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Lots of brands are on there, big names, some of your rivals that go, we believe in flexible working. Great, you've signed the forms, you've done the PR bit, but what's actually going on under the surface? So maybe the first thing to do is be the first company to properly publish your flexible working policies. Stand behind what you're saying would be the best way to go. And that is the best PR you can do for yourselves right now as well. They go hand in hand.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'd like to invite Nick up now to join us and go through these questions. I've been trying to keep on top of some of them, but they're coming in fast, so keep them coming. Come and join here. And I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, Nick, with a very popular question, which is how do we get more men in the room?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the other 7 men who've turned up today. Great. Did that include the tech team as well? I don't know. I guess there's a really important question there. And when I'm coming into my inclusion at Lloyd's role, thinking about Dive-In Festival, we often get asked, aren't these events just preaching to the choir? I think about that in 2 ways. One is, actually, it's okay for the choir to meet. The choir need to meet and rehearse. And if you're doing an event for the choir to meet, that is okay. People like to go to events to meet people like themselves, share the challenges they've had, and work out how to support each other. That's fantastic. But the other part of this kind of community is culture. And if you're going to run an event where you do actually want to share and bring other people, then that's the challenge. So an option today would have been bring a man, bring a +1, and we could have more events. And we're thinking about doing this later in the year, where you actually have a dive-in buddy or something like that, where you bring somebody else. So, and just in terms of the last bit of conversation about what you can do back in the office is actually to challenge the men in your life in the office on issues such as flexible working and understanding the challenges people are going through as well. So I think it depends what event you've got, basically. But I think bringing people along and grabbing somebody and saying, I would like you to come to this event. Will you come to this event with me? And they put their money where their mouth is, as it were, and challenge them.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to group up some of these questions. There's some clear themes coming through. One is around being a career mum and mum guilt, a phrase that I'm sure we've heard before. Lisa, any thoughts on that phrase before? I'm sure Anna's got a bit to say.
I think it's an interesting thing when people say mum guilt, because I think you have to look at it in a different way. So for me personally, microphone is 2 microphones working, sorry. For me personally, I think, yes, okay, you have time where you're not with your children, and I go to my daughter's school once a week, unlike all the other mums that are there 5 times a week. But my daughter sees me working in a successful career, and I think that's actually more important than me picking her up from school every single day. So I think you have to make sure that the time that you do spend with your children is you're present. And that's very important when, particularly, you have stressful roles where you're working lots of different hours. But when you actually spend time with them, be present and don't be on your work phone. And, for that hour that you're going to do something specific with them, do that. and then go back to kind of working on what you do. And you know, my daughter and my son, they both see me working. They're quite happily come and say hello to people on Teams sometimes when I'm in the office at home, and that's fine. Like, I accept that, and I think it's great. My son actually came to work with me in half term, and he's now following Sam on TikTok because he thinks it's great that he can see kind of what the industry does. So yeah, I'd say look at it in a different way, and it's not always guilt, just make the time count.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard my husband use the term dad guilt, I would say as well. Anna, what would you add to this conversation?
Yeah, I think along with kind of, you don't ever hear, oh, how do you do it all? You know, and you don't hear working dads. And I think, you know, coming back to the having it all, that is becoming sort of synonymous with women just carrying it all. It's not that we are having it all or striving to have it all, we're doing it all. So that's the bit that frustrates me, is need men to recognise domestic labour, invisible labour in the room, to step up to the plate when it comes to that. I mean, you know, when you talk about having it all, you don't go to an all-you-can-eat buffet and go, do you know what, I'm so glad I went back for the baby back ribs. I don't want to have it all. It does not make you feel good having it all. But in the same breath, I want something. I want my something. My family is my everything, top. But I want my something, and I'm not going to feel any level of guilt for having it. And I agree with you. We've got to be done with the mum guilt. How do you feel? It's like, well, how does he feel? Parent guilt, parental leave, paternity pay. It's not parental pay. It's not, it shouldn't be on maternal shoulders, this discussion, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know for me, I often look at it as though, what's my choice? Hey, so I'm quite comfortable spending time on my career and travel. I want to. And if I have a moment where I sort of feel that there's some guilt around that, then I can sort of practically check in with myself and look at my diary and think, okay, well, if I'm going to put extra time into that, then actually where might I be able to do something at the weekend or something to feel kind of a bit balanced with it as well. But also acknowledge that, you know, if I need a break for me at the weekend, then Dad can absolutely do that too. It's not all on me to kind of be balancing that. Yeah. Okay, so I love this question. We're talking about sort of people being elevated. Can any of you share some individuals that have personally or professionally elevated you or made you feel more empowered?
Over to Michelle. They all make me feel empowered. There we go.
I had Sophie, God, I'm trying to think of her surname now. She was the former leader of the Women's Equality Party. And she saw I was getting a bit of a hammering online. And she said, just so you know, I've gone through this, and no one will understand what it takes to put your head above the parapet and get away to people saying, you know, you're wrong, or, you know, pipe down, or, you know, why are you even saying this, or you got this wrong. Just the grilling and the glare that you get when you step into rooms. And she said, meet me for coffee. And she sat there, and we both, to be absolutely honest, we emotionally downloaded about how painful it had been, the cost to our children, our family, for actually being the ones that do step up and say something. And that does not get recognised. That often it is women piping up and putting their head above the parapet while carrying everything behind the scenes. And, you know, I sit here divorced, exhausted, trying my best to paper over the cracks of a career that was detonated in one moment where I couldn't see women like me having children, you know, like, but yet we're still carrying the conversation. And, you know, I will that to change.
Yeah, I mean, I know I have at least 5 mentors, whether or not they're technically called that, but people who I know I can pick up the phone to, and they'll always help. And a couple of them have probably spotted me and thought, oh, I think maybe I can kind of reach in and help you there as well. So I'd say, you know, asking that question, looking at how we can mentor other people, that doesn't stop at any stage in our career, and that level of kind of challenge often becomes sort of something harder for us to share and be vulnerable about. That's something we're getting a lot of praise for on the panel, actually.
It was Sophie Walker, I'm sorry I forgot your name. 4-month-old baby.
Get it on the LinkedIn. Yeah, so just a real shout out really for anyone that's helped anyone in this room or continues to do that. I think that's really powerful.
Just going back on that, Sam, going on to mentoring, I think we all do it. without realising we do it. And I think that's why we probably got stumped with that question, because sometimes you don't realise that you're doing it for other people constantly and they're doing it for you. And it's a two-way thing. And if we start mentioning everybody that supported us, we'd be here for a very long time.
Listener,
That's why I didn't mention anybody.
can't pick one. Now, we're talking about this sort of 5 days a week flexibility piece, the change in people coming back. Nick, what do you think is really driving this sort of change in people coming back to the market, and how do you see this conversation fitting in with this sort of less leniency towards the hybrid model we've maybe got used to?
Another conversation we were having before we started is that this is a really crucial time where people are beginning to come back more often, but we know that during COVID and when people were able to, there was a sort of sudden ability to work flexibly, that we made a lot of progress, and it absolutely must not slide backwards. And people are coming back more often. It's the stipulations that concern me a little bit. I'm interested in some companies asking for 5 days a week, and I think, as you were saying, they have that choice, and their people will have a choice too. But it's important that the progress we've made to allow parents to come back, to deal with their caring, to leave early and not pay their fines at nursery, we mustn't lose that. And I think you were quite vociferous about that, weren't you, earlier as well?
Yeah, it's terrifying what's happening at the moment. It's like every headline I see is another organisation pushing people back, and we need to fight forward because, like I said, this isn't a light, nice to have on your list of things to do as a manager. This is the primary way to close the gender pay gap. So ultimately what you're saying by pushing everyone back, apart from you over there, apart from the women in this room, that's what you're saying. You're saying you can't sit with us is ultimately what's happening. And you've got to question why it's happening. It's happening because of empty office spaces that the likes of sort of Lord Sugar need to fill. And so it's not coming from a business talent productivity level. It's coming from a capitalist financial level. And we need to fight back.
Thank you. We've got questions we haven't got time for, but we are holding around for networking for those of you in the room, as we heard earlier. Networking, very powerful, so please do stay and hold on with us as long as you can. I've also got a question around this being recorded, which I believe it is. Looking around for a little bit of a nod. Yes, yes, it definitely is. So it will be available for you after. But I'd like to thank everyone on the panel. I'll put some of these questions maybe to you whilst we are networking as well, and we can leak them out afterwards if you're happy to do so. But thank you all for coming along today, and please continue this conversation. The more openness, the better all round. Hand over to Mark to close. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Anna, Sam for moderating, and our expert panel, Kirat, Lisa, Michelle, and also Nick. This is the first dive-in event of 2025, and thank you all so much for coming out. A huge thank you also to the organizers and the sponsors. Just some key takeaways that I took from today's event is really the importance of allies stepping forward. And the point around it takes a mindset shift is really, really important. Whether you're mentoring someone, inspiring the talent of tomorrow, challenge your organizations on its practices, it is something that we all need to do. And be the change that you want to see. You know, we're about to get our data in for this year. About 43% women in the market. That's a powerful voice and collective cohort. So continue to ask questions, continue to learn, and step forward and challenge the barriers that you face. And Dive In continues to be one of the jewels in the crown of this market. So if you're an organization listening online or in the audience today, please do step forward and be a sponsor for Dive In. And there are loads of opportunities to get involved in Dive In, whether it be the Lloyd's Together communities, the Gender Inclusion Network, or the other partner networks, whether that be as a mentor, a reverse mentor, a sponsor, doing talent and outreach. There are so many opportunities for you to make your voice heard. Please do. And of course, you'll see all of this information on our social media pages and website. So I hope you've enjoyed the event today as much as I have. And I look forward to continuing the conversations. I am going to hand over to Kirat to close today's event with a poem. But after that, please do stay for some afternoon tea and networking. Someone once told me that your network is your net worth, and I don't think I've ever had a truer word said to me. So with that being said, thank you, and Kirat.
Thank you, Mark, for those closing remarks. Just before I read this poem, I just want you all to think about something. As I read these words I wrote, I want every one of you here to imagine they're your words. Reframing the Voice of Doubt by Kirat Kornandra. A whisper lingers in my mind, a fleeting doubt, a tie that binds. It murmurs low, you don't belong. A tired, familiar, faulty song. But what if doubt is not my foe? Not chains to hold, but space to grow. A nudge to stretch, to rise, to learn. A spark within that dares to burn. For every step I claim my place. I shape the path, I set the pace. Not perfect, no, but real and alive. Not here to prove, but to arrive. So when that voice returns once more, I'll nod, then I'll walk right through that door. Not held by fear, but standing tall, because I was meant to be here after all. Thank you.
Oh.